this is your first time tuning in, well, strap in. We are doing something different today. We are doing a Q&A. From, I want to say it was a Q&A I put up on my story on my Instagram, CORY_FIT at CoreyFit. Got some really good questions. And as I was answering some of them, I'm like, shit. There are people who do not follow me on Instagram. And of those who do follow me on Instagram, they don't always catch the stories. I get it. Y'all have lives. Y'all have things that you have to do on a regular basis, and the stories are only up for 24 hours. So why don't I put this into a longer form video content style piece of internet content? So that's what we're doing. Episode 19, doing a Q&A. Real quick, before we get started, you know the drill. If you are here from Spotify or Apple Podcast, go ahead, leave me a review. If you're here from YouTube, if you are watching the video, I guess from whatever platform you're watching from, go ahead, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you. It really does help. It really helps get the word out. As always, yes, I am taking one-on-one consultations. I am taking coaching clients. You do not have to be a competitor. You can have no interest in the sport of bodybuilding. You can just be like, hey, I want to get more out of what I'm currently doing on account I've been doing it for a while and I'm not where I want to be. And if that is the case, whether you are looking for one-on-one coaching, wow, okay, 2 minutes this time. If you're looking for one-on-one coaching, I offer that for competitors and non-competitors. Whether you are in a fat loss phase, whether you're looking to just straighten things out, get yourself on a program of some sort. We're in June. It is June. You still have time to summer shred if you're shredding for summer. You also have time to build for summer if you are going through a growth period this summer. Also can help you with that. One-on-one consultations, they are not limited to lab work, PEDs, competitors. That can be anything you want to go over. That can be something, you can be like, hey, I want you to walk me through everything I need to know about PEDs. It can be a 1-hour lecture if you would like that. We could go through your diet. We can go through your training. You can pull up some training videos for me and go through them together. Whatever it is you are looking for, I can definitely help you with that. Link to both of those services in the show notes below. As always, Patreon, if you want exclusive only educational content on the Patreon. That is something I offer. Let's go ahead and get started. So first question, what are the labs you generally want to see? So lab work, big ones that I want to look at, CBC. So hematology, H&H, BUN, creatinine, CMP, we're looking at liver enzymes. Sure, there are other things on there as well. Those are the big ones that are hormonally based. For hormones, I'm going to look at DHEA, free test, testosterone, SHBG. Those are all going to be helpful in establishing circulating total androgens, precursors in the case of DHEA. If you can get pregnenolone, great. Estradiol, progesterone. And if you are getting these done, I want to see them ideally 7 days before your period. So quick little crash course in periods. Day 1 of your bleed, day 1 of your period. That's when you start counting. 7-ish days before your period. Yes, that's when we want to get estradiol, progesterone checked. If you're irregular, let's do our best. If you have any kind of data to support when post-ovulation would occur, pre-bleed, that would be helpful. Checking these hormones at different times in your cycle will result in different values, some values that are acceptable and some that are not. So I get this question a lot. If you're someone who's looking to do a one-time consult and you're like, hey, should I get blood work done before? Yes, absolutely. If you have anything blood work related, any concerns that you're like, hey, I would like you to take a second look at this. Please come with updated blood work. It doesn't have to be updated. It can be outdated as well. That's also fine. I can review that. But to get the most out of the service, to get the most out of the time, bring me some fresh labs. Bring me some labs. So I think I covered a few other things. Okay. Cortisol would be helpful. TSH, T3. Those are going to be the ones that we want to look at. Now, One of the common problems that I find is that if you're going through your provider, you can request labs. They might even push you to be like, hey, are you amenorrheic? Because that's what I need you to say in order to draw these labs. And if that's the case, by all means, but be sure to clarify what labs exactly are you going to draw. Have them listed out. Or if you are already taking notes, write these down and bring them with you to your appointment and be like, hey, these are the ones I want to get checked. Can you confirm these are going to come back on the panel? Just want to double check. So real quick, CBC, CMP, DHEA, testosterone, free test, SHBG, estradiol, progesterone, TSH, T3, cortisol. Yeah, that's don't think I'm forgetting any. Is there a PD that doesn't change the voice of a woman? Yes. So our non-androgenic PEDs. Those are going to be ones that do not act on the androgen receptor. All good options that will not put you at risk for virilization. So changing the voice of a woman, that is denoted as androgenicity. So virilization, the androgenic effects of anabolic androgenic steroids. So if we are completely removing risk, like you're very risk averse, you're like, I do not want any chance of anything happening ever, avoid the anabolic androgenic steroids. Non-androgenic performance enhancing drugs that we could consider: GH, Clenbuterol, thyroid replacement. So either monotherapy or dual therapy. The only difference is dual therapy is a combination of T4 and T3. Monotherapy is singular, so only T4 or only T3. Let's see. L-carnitine. I'm going to opt for the most bioavailable, so injectable L-carnitine. That would be my preference. When we start getting in the weeds, okay, sure, yohimbine, let's throw it in there. Metformin, telmisartan. Maybe I'm forgetting some. If I am, let me know in the comments below. All right. Impact of TRT on fertility for women. So this one, highly individualized, as you're going to hear me say probably several times during this video. There is a minimum threshold that you want testosterone to be at in order to produce along the cascade of hormones that, so testosterone is going to aromatize into estradiol. That's one of the pathways in which estradiol is created. This is largely going to be determined by total circulating testosterone, but it's also going to have there will be upstream effects of DHEA on the production of testosterone as well as estrone. So relating this back to the actual question, TRT. TRT in itself is not like a death sentence to fertility, but you need to be cognizant of where your levels were at prior to starting TRT. Not just your testosterone levels, but your estradiol levels. Obviously, progesterone. Progesterone is going to be the primary hormone that is going to allow you to carry out a pregnancy full term. When it comes to determining the impact on fertility, largely going to depend on your current state, whether or not you, without TRT, sans TRT, can see a pregnancy full term. And if that's something that's at all a concern, I would strongly recommend working with a fertility specialist prior to starting TRT. If that's something, and when I say concern, I mean like if you have a suspicion, an inkling that there might be problems down the road, or this might be a more challenging process for you, your partner, I would go ahead and start the process of at least investigating, okay, what is the root of the problem? But what I can say is that TRT in itself, my understanding is that if your test is too low, there could be the consideration around supportive therapy, not necessarily TRT, but some kind of therapy to support levels rising if it's too low, as well as if it's too high. If it's too high, there could be an anti-androgen, an antagonist that would be recommended maybe to lower testosterone levels, circulating androgens. So highly individualized. It is not like A to B, like you start TRT, you're going to be infertile. It's not that straightforward. it is something to consider if you are going to have anabolics in place in a cycle format. So our performance enhancing drugs, our Anavar, Primo, Mastron, you're going to have something in place that will ultimately cause the suppression of these hormones. That in itself is going to lower testosterone levels, thereby lowering estradiol levels. If you have any concerns about fertility and you are also considering starting TRT, it's worth working with a specialist, but keep in mind, TRT for women is something that is still very taboo. There's a lot of providers who do not believe in it, even if levels are suppressed. This is even more so the case for individuals who are healthy, who are in good shape, who are younger, who are not quite at a perimenopausal, suspected perimenopausal age range biologically. Keep that in mind. Is low-dose TRT cream enough to make you hold water and put on weight? It's a good question. It's a good question because frankly, without knowing the dose of the TRT cream and what that translates to in terms of what that amount per dose, what that takes your total serum levels to, it's hard to say. I can tell you that just simply having TRT in place, whenever someone says like, is using X going to make you hold water? To what degree? What degree are we talking about? Are we talking about, like in the case of like hormonal birth control, that is one I would say when someone states, does X make you hold water? I'm going to say, yeah, hormonal birth control, synthetic forms of these hormones can drive water retention. In terms of just TRT alone, it's not going to make you hold water the way that I believe you're imagining it will. We've used both TRT exclusively and TRT with Anavar. Starting TRT, sure, there was an increase in a lot of qualities in terms of like quality of life. There were a lot of improvements that I saw. I did not see a negative compositional change. I think this is like the most, correct way to say this. I did not see a negative compositional change that I would delineate due to an increase in water. Did I see that with Anavar? I mean, yeah, I looked fuller. I looked more muscly, but to the extent in which most people are asking like, oh, is it going to make you bloated? No. It's hard to say though, because you could take a low dose of TRT cream and you could use a lot of it. You could use so much that now you are in a supra physiological threshold of testosterone for a female. And if that's the case, yes, you very well could hold water. I've had women come to me who were on TRT, who were at doses that were inappropriate, that were super physiological when their intention with using TRT was just to establish normal to normal high levels. And yes, they did report they were holding water. Now, the bioavailability of TRT in a cream form is, it's poor to simply put that. But what I can also say is like, I've been impressed with people's ability to administer more than what they intended to. If there's a will, there's a way. So I would first establish what is the dose that you're taking in milligrams. Then I would look at what that takes you to in terms of serum levels. And if that threshold, if that value is under 100 nanograms per deciliter, I can say generally it shouldn't make you hold water. Asterisk. Okay. Unless you are someone who maybe already has a high level of free test. So of the total circulating test, maybe you are under 100 nanograms per deciliter, but you find that your free test is elevated as we see in women with PCOS. And if that's the case, potentially there could be some water retention. I say that double asterisk loosely because, again, I don't know what you necessarily mean in terms of holding water. That is a very, and it's not like a knock at you. It's a good question, okay? It's a really good question. But the way I think you're asking it, or what I think you're asking, no. How does PrEP differ natural versus on TRT? Good question. So whenever you are in a state of low energy availability, over time, if you're in this state chronically, as a female and a male, your body is going to take the fuel, the input of calories, and it's going to allocate them for only critical functions. Now, depending on your baseline in terms of body fat, in terms of caloric intake, your resilience just generally to stress, both real and perceived, this could be something that maybe entering a prep is not as taxing, is not as fatiguing for you. And perhaps there's not as stark of a impact on your hormonal production, the cascade of these hormones that ultimately will dictate ovulation. However, for individuals who are not as resilient, just simply being in this prepped, dieted down state for an extended period of time, you could see that over time you develop relative energy deficiency syndrome, which is just a really fancy way to say that there are hormonal impacts along the cascade that no longer prioritize ovulation and thereby lead to hypothalamic amenorrhea. And if that's the case, maybe you already know my stance on it. It's something that we need to prioritize. It's something that in the long term is not good. It's really not great, not ideal for fertility. So fertility is a concern. And you're like weighing the options of like TRT, anabolics, non-androgenic PEDs. First and foremost, you have to audit and really dig into what is the impact of just being in this prepped state. And is it enough to negatively impact fertility? Bonus tip, if you are amenorrheic prior to starting prep is only going to exacerbate that. This is also the case for women who are biologically in an age range where we can expect them to experience a reduction in these precursor hormones, so pregnenolone, DHEA. And if that's the case, okay, also exacerbated. The trifecta of this is being on something like a hormonal birth control, so synthetic forms of estradiol or progesterone, either dual therapy, monotherapy. These will also have a negative impact and cause a downregulation of these hormones. So when we're talking about how does prep differ for a natural athlete versus someone on TRT, first and foremost, I work backwards. Are you on hormonal birth control? Because natural versus TRT, okay, well, at least with TRT, you're still going to have the suppression of estradiol and progesterone, but with the test in place, with the TRT in place, at least you're getting some kind of support there. It's not the best, but it's a little better. If you are menopausal, okay, TRT versus a natural prep. Well, if you are in menopause, it's unlikely that even non-pharmacological methods in which we would influence circulating androgens, it's unlikely that these interventions are going to be that effective. So let's say, again, another favorability to being on TRT versus being natural in the case of someone who's in menopause. Let's say you're a little bit amenorrheic, like naturally you lose your period, you lose the ovulation, because you can have the period without ovulating. That's an important distinction. You want to look at lab work for that. If that's the case, being on TRT, again, is going to offer supportive therapy to circulating androgens. Is it going to be enough to offset that? It's hard to say. You still might need some kind of support in the form of like a DHEA and boron, maybe even a progesterone in a non-synthetic form, so a bioidentical form that could help. Globally, though, if we're talking about a first-time competitor, someone who's like, hey, I don't even know if I like this sport. It's something I want to do. It's something that I'm interested in, taking myself to that level of competition, but I know it's a lot. Maybe we don't put TRT in place depending on your needs, depending on where your levels are at. It largely is going to depend on if there's an indication for you to be on TRT, or if there's an indication that just generally amongst the cascade at some point there's some kind of deficiency. There is not an adequate amount of one part of the cascade that now is in turn causing low levels of testosterone. For instance, if we're seeing that there's a low level of progesterone, low level of pregnenolone. Okay, maybe we work even further up the cascade. Let's talk about your diet. Perhaps there's room for improvement from a fat intake standpoint, because at the top of this cascade, the top one, the starting point, step one is cholesterol. So if you're someone who's been dieting on low fat for a very long time, or let's say the quality of the fats that you're getting are not very good, a lot of saturated fats, okay, maybe we make the switch to unsaturated and see, okay, is there an improvement in hormonal production? All this to say, there are a lot of ways in which we can approach correcting the hormonal imbalance. How is this going to actually translate over to your experience in a prep? Well, I'll tell you, having low test versus having normal to normal high test. Normal to normal high test is going to offer some kind of coverage in terms of anti-catabolism, so preventing that muscle loss. Now, personally for me, I would say if someone is a higher level athlete, if they're an athlete who's going to be in the sport for an extended period of time, they have aspirations to compete at the national level, they have aspirations to become a professional, and then they would like to be a competitive professional. Okay, in that case, I'm going to push towards TRT because the state that you're going to be in a contest prep ultimately is going to exacerbate the suppression of these hormones, which is why I would say, yes, we need to look at serum levels, but we also need to look at the application here for that individual relative to their aspirations and career in the sport. 49-year-old female, low test, 25, starting with TRT at 0.20 mLs, 20 units sub-Q once a week, too high of a dose? Great question. I won't be able to answer this because I don't have the milligram that you're at. I can tell you that in the case that you are drawing up from a bottle that is 10 milligrams per ml, let's just use that for simplicity. Well, that's only going to be 1 milligram a week. Now, if you are drawing up from a bottle that is 100 milligrams per ml, well, now 0.2 mLs is going to be 10 milligrams per week. It's not to say that 10 milligrams is too high, but really the consideration is we need to understand where this dose is taking your serum levels. So because you're only dosing once a week, I'm going to presume that you're not pulling up from a bottle that is low concentration, because if you were, you would be dosing this likely daily. Now, assuming that you're pulling up from a bottle that's at least 100 milligrams per ml, you're injecting once a week, so you're doing 10 milligrams a week. That might be okay. That might be a reasonable amount of TRT to start. At 49, it's unlikely that your levels are going to come back up. So yes, I would say justifiably, there is an indication. However, if you're drawing up from a bottle that is 200 milligrams per ml, that would now be 20 milligrams per week. I would say generally, globally, that's probably too high. I've yet to see someone who is at that dose, who that dose of 20 milligrams a week didn't take them to a supraphysiological range in terms of total testosterone. Now, because you're drawing up once a week, you need to get your labs checked. I would wait generally until you've been at this dose. I mean, okay, best practice is to wait 5 half-lives, 5 weeks in terms of testing your lab, so letting levels become stable. But I can tell you, if you came to me and you were like, hey, I'm at 20 milligrams a week, if that's where you're at, or even potentially higher than that, because sometimes bottles can be 250 milligrams per ml, I would presume that you don't need to wait that long. The 5 half-lives, you could probably get them checked, and it's probably going to come back with a value, a serum level that is over 100 nanograms per deciliter. And if that's the case, then yes, I would say that that's too high to start. What do you think of test pellets for women in their 40s? So not a fan of pellets, and here's why. So pellets, they're a little bead or pellet usually that is then going to be slowly released into your system, into your body over the course of 2-6 months. In the instance where, let's say it is a longer, not suspension, that's not the right word, but the release is going to occur over a longer duration. Well, in order to support the therapy, they're going to load it up, meaning it's probably going to be a higher dose. What I've seen anecdotally, individuals who are on pellets, their levels have always 100% of the time come back and been too high. Now, also, there could be a discrepancy in timing, but I would say generally, it's a very risky thing to put yourself at a supraphysiological level as a female if virilization is a concern, meaning you don't want to incur masculine side effects. If that is a priority for you, I wouldn't go with any kind of administration, any kind of route of administration. So pellet, cream, pellet cream. I guess there's like a nasal one. There's like is there a buccal one? I don't know. I would go with the one that can be most easily adjusted and modified, which would be injection. The other part to this that is a consideration in terms of cream is that you do want to make sure that the reading that you're getting is accurate. So with cream, that's going to be largely influenced by the absorption, the pharmacokinetics of the actual drug itself. So I don't know about you, but I personally have always had to be very honest with myself as to whether I'm applying the correct amount, because you'll see, and not necessarily with creams, I'm talking just generally like any kind of cream application like retinol or just face serum, whatever. Those are things that are very easy to fuck up. And when we're talking about a drug that there's a very narrow therapeutic index of, what we can tolerate before we experience side effects, I wouldn't fuck around and find out. Same thing with pellet. I wouldn't risk it when injections are very much a viable option. And I mean, depending on your provider, depending on their comfortability, there are a lot of providers who won't offer injections. They're not comfortable with it. It is something that's still very taboo. So it's worth exploring providers that understand the discrepancy in bioavailability relative to the different routes of administration. Also keep in mind they make a lot of money off pellets. So can HGH help with tissue damage from injuries? Yes, it can. It's going to help with protein synthesis, collagen synthesis. It's going to create a preparatory state. So it's going to proliferate satellite cells and give you the potential for like muscle building, so hypertrophy. Now, in terms of actual tissue damage, if we're talking about an injury, and I guess let me back up. Depending on what you have access to, if you have access to GH, I would certainly recommend it, but realistically, you're probably not. Most people won't have access to it, and it's not something you can just get prescribed. What you'll find is that private businesses will prescribe growth hormone secretagogues, so ghrelin agonist, and they're technically able to give you something that will in turn cause the release of growth hormone. However, it's not as direct of a stimulation as just using GH. So it's kind of like the analogy with like DHEA versus TRT. DHEA is further up in the cascade, which will then cause downstream effects of TRT, or not TRT, testosterone production, whereas something like ipamorelin, sermorelin, those will act on the pituitary, but there's a little bit of a discrepancy depending on if insulin is elevated, I believe. So with that, you want to keep that in mind. The other part to this is like if you're dealing with an actual injury, you might be better off looking at something like TB500, which has been shown to work specifically on dynamic muscle or dynamic tissue, so muscle, as opposed to something like BPC. So depending on the kind of injury, if we're talking about tissue, connective tissue, so something that's avascular, BPC would be a better route, a better option as opposed to TB. Whereas if we're talking about an injury to muscle, that would be the way to go. Does 1.5 IUs of GH and 5 to 10 milligrams of Anavar cause initial water retention? So 2-part question here. 1 to 2 IUs of GH isn't going to cause water retention in the way that I think you're thinking it will. It's kind of what I said before. It's like if you're one of those like, oh, no, I don't want it. Like, is it going to make me bloated? No, it's not. That was something that prior to starting GH, I was like, if this like thickens my waist or makes me like bloated, like in my abdomen, like I'm not going to like taking it. I like GH. I think it's a great option for many, many reasons. Now, that is the first part of this question. Now, when we look at 5 to 10 milligrams of Anavar, sure, that will cause initial scale weight water gain. Yes, there will be water that is then pulled into the muscle and you will feel fuller and like maybe you'll feel more muscly. This is very commonly used in the competition space, yes, to drive training performance. And yeah, I'm talking about like females at very low doses, not talking about men, relax. But if you were using a lot of an anabolic, a lot of it, sure, there could be water retention that is to a degree that is very unfavorable. Without context, it's hard to really give advice here other than like be very specific with why you're using the GH, why you're using the Anavar. And I think the Anavar too, like, I mean, if we're talking about a female, like 5 milligrams is plenty, depending on the division. Keep in mind that the athletes that I'm speaking to, the demographic that I'm specifically targeting is like bikini competitors, some wellness competitors who don't want to abuse drugs. And if that's the case, I would say 5 milligrams is plenty. Even for men, I gotta be honest, like 10 milligrams will work wonders. If you are someone who's in a a division that has a very high degree of muscularity, like requirements, just baseline to do well, don't listen to me. I mean, like, yeah, listen to me, but like there could be discrepancies in the doses that I'm recommending, but we're not talking about much. 10 milligrams of Anavar for men, it will yield results. Now, if you're not an open bodybuilder, if you're not, I guess not an open bodybuilder, but if you're not a male bodybuilder who's trying to be like really competitive in the sport, you can probably get away with 10 milligrams, particularly if you're an inexperienced or generally a new user. I wouldn't go as far to say as that's going to sustain all of your physique goals, but I think it's a bit absurd when you have like non-competitors or first-time PED users on the male side who are like, yeah, I need to do 20, 30, 50 milligrams of Anavar. I think that's insane. Does the Anavar have an effect on ovulation intra or post-cycle? Yes, it does. Anavar will have suppressive effects on all your hormones, so just relative to ovulation, it's not good for it. I'm 22. Would you recommend Anavar at a low dose, and I want kids in the future? Without any context, no, I wouldn't. Anavar is going to be helpful in facilitating anabolism. If you're 22, okay, I would look at serum levels for circulating androgens. I would look at your circulating test levels, your free test, your DHEA. I'd also look at estradiol and progesterone, because we do know that estradiol plays a really significant role. Like, it's actually needed for the conversion of GH to IGF-1. It's needed for a process involved in building. So in the case of like, Corey, do you recommend Anavar at a low dose? Without any context, I gotta say no. But at the same time, like, sure, there is an individual I can think of who like, maybe it makes sense. Going back to what I answered previously is like, if you want kids in the future, I would shy away from using anabolics in a very spastic sense, unnecessarily, if you will. Being so young, if levels are adequate, you can probably go a little bit longer without actually, dipping your toe in and starting down the path of performance enhancing drugs. Also, prior to the anabolics, I would start with the non-androgenic PEDs first. What can my wife take on top of her test andro to prevent virilization? Without context, going to be hard to say. If she has TRT in place already, okay, let's assume that it's at a reasonable dose and it's just in place to support normal high levels of testosterone. If that's the case, amazing. Preventing virilization, that, like, the annoying way to answer that is the only way to prevent virilization is to have no anabolics in place, period. If we're assuming that the TRT is in place as supportive therapy, truly HRT, and not at a very high dose, okay, that is reasonable. However, if you're looking at like, what else can she take that will not cause virilization, then it's going to be your non-androgenic PEDs. So GH, L-carnitine, Clenbuterol, T4, T3, metformin, telmisartan, Himvi. Like, there's like a whole list, and I wouldn't say across the board throw all of them in place. There are indications that would say don't use all of them at once. So depending on what her needs are, is she trying to lose body fat? Is she trying to build muscle? Let's say, I can answer this a completely different way. Let's say she has the test in place. Her levels are still under 100 nanograms per deciliter, but she's like, I still, like, things are changing. That could be related to free test being potentially too high. So if her free test is too high, it's a very common practice to put something like spironolactone in place, to put something that's going to have antagonistic properties on the androgen receptor. But in that case, I'm not a big fan of it, only because it's like, I would rather not put something in place to undo the action of something else that we have in place. So if that's the case, and her total circulating testosterone is still under 100 nanograms per deciliter, I would back down on that. On the off chance that it's not, that her total circulating testosterone at whatever dose she's at on TRT, if that is above 100 nanograms per deciliter, then I would certainly come down on that. Can you cure hypothyroidism with supplements? Cure? Hard to say. Hypothyroidism? Hard to say. This is one of those things, like, I can tell you, if you yourself, if you have been hypothyroid for an extended period of time and you've done things like you've taken lifestyle factors into account and you've made adjustments, like, let's say you developed hypothyroidism prior to starting prep. You did prep, it made it worse. You came out of prep, still bad. You gained weight, lowered all of your stressors, did everything that was very supportive, very pro thyroid function, and you didn't see any kind of improvement. Okay, maybe you could do further testing and look to see, depending on how high TSH is, maybe there is an indication to do further testing for like thyroid antibodies. And if that's the case, that would give you insight into whether it's like Hashimoto's or something that, truly is like a thyroid disorder. And if that's the case, I that is not in my realm of like, I tend to refer out for hypothyroidism. It's just something like if someone is needing truly like guidance on a thyroid disorder, I don't want to get my hands in that. Now, if we're just talking about acute hypothyroidism, if we're talking about someone who's downregulated, which that is very much expected and should be something that we should work towards seeing improvements through lifestyle modifications. Can you supplement in the non-HRT sense? And when I say HRT relative to thyroid, I mean like T4, T3, dual therapy, not monotherapy. And if that's something that, let's say you have only began to see these signs of hypothyroidism in a non-fat loss phase and a non-contest prep setting, then sure, you could supplement with something like selenium. Again, I would be very, very cautious with taking anything that I'm saying right now and running with it and considering that like a protocol recommendation. Really, without labs, it's hard to give firm advice relative to any kind of disorder. And without the context of, okay, is this from a fat loss setting? Is it from a state that would drive down thyroid conversion like T4 to T3? It's hard to say. How is T3 used in a cut? Okay. So what we know is that the conversion of T4 to T3, the production of thyroid hormone in the active form of T3, that becomes downregulated very quickly once you are in a fat loss phase. Now, does that mean that you need to have supportive therapy like T4, T3 or monotherapy, just T4, just T3? Does that mean you need to have it in place immediately upon starting a fat loss phase in a non-contest prep setting? No. What I will say though, for athletes who have high aspirations in the sport, T4, T3 can be used in what I would consider, personally, I would just say is a reasonably safe method in order to support normal function. That is at the starting dose. Progressing past that, progressing and using T4, T3 in a way that's used to really shed like a lot of body fat, using it at 2, 3, 4x the starting dose. Not the best idea, but it's also not my place to tell you what the fuck to do. Like, this is just, I just talk on the internet. I just get on YouTube and just talk. I do it on Instagram sometimes too. To answer the question, how is it used? It's used to facilitate that conversion, or in this case where it's just T3, it's used to support basically a downregulated conversion that is going to continue to be downregulated as you go through a fat loss phase. All right, Clen, pill or liquid? Always pill. Always pill. The only instances where I've heard of someone like really ending up in a bad position because of Clen, it just, again, anecdotal, doesn't mean that it hasn't happened otherwise, were individuals who are using liquid Clen. Liquid Clen, you have to consider, okay, it's in some kind of suspension, some kind of liquid. Sure, you can mix it up, but there's really no guarantee that it's homogenized equally throughout the solution. That's what it was. Word that was escaping me. I do think that with Clen, there's a lot of individuals who they will tweet these stories of like, oh, this person ended up in the hospital. The times I've heard someone ending up in the hospital have all been related to using liquid Clen and taking a dose that was much, much too high. Pill, I would much prefer. And even with that, start at 20 micrograms. Start at a dose that is reasonable. And then from there, work your way up as needed, only if needed. I can tell you that like 40, 60, 80 micrograms, like past that point, there isn't a need, like really past 80. If you're that far behind where you need, because we're talking like 20 micrograms, that's giving you what, like 100, 150 calorie buffer in terms of fat loss. Like yeah, you can escalate it, but like also don't fall that far behind. Like don't put yourself in a position where it's the tail end of contest prep or a fat loss phase and you're like, yeah, you know what, I'm just blasted, I'm going to lose as much. Just make the deficit some other way. There's a lot of other ways that you can make it. Really, where you need to be cognizant around the dosing around Clen is that once it starts to impact sleep, this is now a problem. Now, for some people, it begins to impact sleep even at 40 micrograms. So keep that in mind. Clen has a much longer half-life than albuterol, which is a rescue drug for asthma. It's the same kind of drug in the sense, but when we're talking about Clen has a 36-hour half-life. Albuterol has like an 8 to 10, I believe. So with that in mind, it's not to say that albuterol couldn't be used if you're trying to dose more frequently. I don't love that because even in the case of someone who's like, well, I'm going to do 20 in the morning and then 20 in the afternoon, it's still like, yeah, but it's still close to bed. Like it's still close to bed. Also, Clen, you take that in the morning. Would never take it PM or later in the afternoon. I don't see the value in doing multiple doses of that. Can you do an episode on mini cuts? Coach recommended Anavar for a 4 to 6 week mini cut. Seems off to me. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it either. If you were going to be doing a mini cut, to me, this indicates that this is a fat loss phase outside of what your like primary fat loss phase relative to a contest prep would be. And I'm going to assume if they're recommending Anavar that you're a competitor. In the case of a mini cut, the mini cut is the time where you are washing off body fat that you have gained in this non-prep setting, whether that be a growth phase or post-show phase, whatever it is. I wouldn't use Anavar because, I mean, frankly, it's the worst time to use it. It puts you in a position where you're exposed to the androgenicity without really being able to take advantage of the anabolism potential of Anavar. That's what it's best at doing, is helping build. Instead, for a 4 to 6 week mini cut, I would look at T4, T3, I would look at Clenbuterol, I would look at these fat loss agents that are non-androgenic by mechanism. And frankly, I would leverage those if we're looking at what drugs could help you during that mini cut specifically. Thoughts on recomping early in a diet phase when introducing a deficit plus a new anabolic cycle. So similar thought process here. I don't like the discrepancy of using the anabolic in a fat loss phase. And I believe a girl asked this, if you're a female athlete, it's like, okay, for one, using the anabolic when you are in a position to grow, that's going to be its best use. Now, if you're in a diet phase, kind of what I already said, I'm not going to just repeat it verbatim. I would save that. I would save that anabolic. Are you going to recomp? I mean, sure, but like you're going to be losing some fat. You're going to be adding the anabolic in, so you're going to get a bump in weight. So like the coach is definitely like getting the better end of the deal here, because they're going to have convinced you that, yeah, you recomped, like you built the muscle, you lost the fat. See, I'm amazing. I'm magic. As soon as you remove the anabolic, some of that artificial weight that came on initially, it's going to fall off too. And if you lost the fat, cool. Okay. Like, I mean, you're going to technically be better for it. But again, I would just be very specific and intentional with like the phase itself and then what tools are being used, and consider the mechanism of action of those drugs and whether or not they're supportive of the phase that you're in. All right. And thank you guys for watching. If you like this style of episode, definitely let me know. If you want me to do a non-PED Q&A, please let me know in the comments below. Let me know if this was helpful. If you are one of the people who asked these questions and you want to leave more context, leave it in the comments or go ahead over to Patreon. Let me know, give me more context, and I will try to answer it better. If you're not satisfied with my answer, send me a message maybe, or don't. I don't know why I extended that offer. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. As always, I will see you in the next one.